I never thought I would be the kind of person to write down something like this, but lately I feel like I have to. It is not just about remembering, it is about making sense of things that don't seem to have any explanation. Maybe if I tell it in detail from the beginning, I will understand better what has been happening to me. Or maybe someone who hears this story will know what I cannot know. Either way, I am starting here. It was last spring when everything began. At that time, my life was as ordinary as it gets. I lived in a small town in the Midwest, worked at a local hardware store, and rented a modest one-bedroom house at the edge of town. The kind of house that always smells faintly of wood and dust, no matter how often you clean. I liked it because it was quiet and the rent was cheap. There was a porch where I could sit in the evenings with a beer and listen to the cicadas. I did not have much to complain about. Life was simple. The house had been built in the 1940s, and from the first day I moved in, I noticed little quirks. The bathroom door never shut all the way unless you gave it a hard push. The floor in the hallway creaked in a single spot as if someone were stepping there even when no one was. I thought nothing of it. Old houses make noises. At least that was what I told myself. One night in early May, I came home from a late shift at the store. It was past 11 and the streets were empty. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, something felt strange. The air inside the house was colder than usual, colder than it should have been for that time of year. I remember standing in the living room and holding my breath as if listening for something, but there was nothing, just silence. I shook it off, set down my keys, and turned on the lamp. Everything looked the same. I told myself it was just the long day messing with me. The first real incident happened a few days later. I had left a glass of water on the kitchen counter before heading to bed. When I woke in the morning, the glass was gone. I found it later in the living room, sitting on the coffee table. I live alone. No one had been there. I laughed about it at first, thinking maybe I had been tired and carried it there without remembering. But the more I thought about it, the less that explanation made sense. Still, it was just a glass. People forget things all the time. Then came the sounds. I would be lying in bed and hear faint footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, like someone was pacing. At first, I blamed the neighbors. The houses in my neighborhood were close together and sound carried easily. But one night I got up, turned on the hallway light, and saw with my own eyes the floorboards moving slightly under pressure, as if someone had just stepped there. Yet there was no one, just the empty hallway stretching to the living room. I started losing sleep. My friends at work noticed I was tired and asked what was wrong. I lied and said I had been watching too much late-night TV. I did not want them to think I was going crazy. Inside, though, I was scared, really scared. I could not shake the feeling that I was not alone in that house. One evening in June, after another restless night, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. I ended up talking to Mrs. Jensen, the older woman who lived 2 doors down. She had lived on that street for nearly 50 years. I don't know what made me bring it up, but I mentioned the strange noises. She gave me a look I will never forget, a kind of mixture between pity and concern. She asked if I knew the history of the house. I said I didn't. She hesitated, then told me that a man had died there many years ago. He lived alone, much like me. The official story was that it was an accident, but she lowered her voice and said not everyone believed that. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't want to know. That night, I couldn't sit still. I kept walking from room to room, turning lights on and off, as if light could chase away whatever was in the dark. Around midnight, I sat down on the couch, exhausted, and closed my eyes. That was when I heard it. A whisper, faint but clear. It came from the hallway, carried softly like someone was speaking through the walls. I couldn't make out the words. I froze, my whole body tense, waiting for it to come again. It did. A murmur, like a voice just out of reach. I stood up slowly, heart pounding, and called out. No answer, just silence. I walked into the hallway, every step heavy. There was nothing. Nothing but the creak of the old boards under my feet. After that night, the whispers became more frequent, always in the hallway, always at night. I stopped trying to ignore them. I knew they were real. One evening, I pressed my ear against the wall, desperate to understand. The whisper was so close I swore it was right behind the plaster. Then, clear as day, I heard a single word. Leave. I stumbled back, almost tripping over myself. My heart raced so hard I thought it would burst. That was the first time I truly felt like I was in danger. I began writing down everything that happened, trying to keep a record. The missing objects, the footsteps, the whispers. Part of me thought maybe I could find a pattern. Another part thought maybe I was proving to myself that it wasn't just my imagination. But every time I read those notes, the same question haunted me. Why me? Why this house? Why now? I didn't have answers, but I had the sense that things were only beginning. And I was right. Because what happened next would shake me even more than whispers in the night. What happened next made me realize that whatever was in that house wasn't just trying to scare me. It wanted something from me. I didn't sleep at all after that night. The word leave echoed in my head like it had been carved there. Every sound in the house, every shadow felt like a warning. I spent the next day at work moving like a ghost myself, slow and distracted. My coworkers asked if I was okay, and I kept saying I was just tired. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I felt like the walls of that little house were closing in on me. That evening, I decided to stay somewhere else just to clear my head. But I didn't have much money, and I didn't want to explain anything to friends or family. So instead, I drove aimlessly around the outskirts of town until the sky went dark. Eventually, I ended up at a diner just off the highway. It was one of those places that never close, with flickering neon signs and tired waitresses who call you hun. I sat in a booth nursing a coffee I didn't want, staring at the condensation on the window. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Old houses creak. People imagine things when they're stressed. That whisper could have been the wind or pipes or my own mind. But even as I thought it, I didn't believe it. My hands were still shaking. When I finally went back to the house, it was close to midnight. The porch light flickered as I walked up, even though it had never done that before. I unlocked the door slowly, holding my breath. The air inside was heavy, like it had been sitting still for hours. I set my keys down, turned on the lamp in the living room, and waited. Nothing happened. For a moment, I felt foolish. I decided to go straight to bed without looking down the hallway. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. to the sound of the kitchen faucet running, not dripping, running, a steady stream. My heart started pounding immediately. I lay there listening for a few seconds, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. I got out of bed slowly, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor, and walked toward the kitchen. The faucet was indeed on, water pouring out, but the handle was turned off. It shouldn't have been running at all. I reached out with a trembling hand and turned the handle anyway. The water stopped. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me. They were soft but distinct, like someone walking barefoot across the floor. I spun around so fast I almost slipped on the wet patch near the sink. The kitchen was empty. I stood there staring into the darkness of the hallway, my chest heaving. My throat was so dry I couldn't even call out. Then I heard the whisper again. Not from the hallway this time, but right next to me near my ear. Go. Just that one word, but it felt like a cold breath against my skin. I stumbled backward, knocking into the counter, and grabbed my car keys without even thinking. I bolted out the door into the night, barefoot, my heart pounding in my ears. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, staring at the house. The porch light flickered again, casting strange shadows across the yard. I couldn't bring myself to go back in, not that night. I drove to a cheap motel on the edge of town and checked in. The room smelled like bleach and cigarette smoke, but at least it felt empty. I lay on the bed fully dressed and stared at the ceiling until dawn. The next day, I called in sick to work. I told them I had food poisoning. Then I sat in that motel room trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to break the lease and leave town altogether, but I didn't have the money for that. Besides, running away without answers didn't feel right. I had the sense that whatever was happening in that house would follow me unless I figured it out. That thought scared me more than the whispers. I decided to learn more about the house. That afternoon, I drove to the county records office. It was a small building with beige walls and old filing cabinets that smelled of dust. I asked the clerk for any public records on my address. She gave me a puzzled look but handed over a manila folder. Inside were old property deeds, inspection notes, and a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1978. The headline made my stomach drop. Local man found dead in home. No foul play suspected. The article was short but mentioned that the man's name was Harold Evans. He had been a recluse, rarely seen by neighbors. He died alone in the hallway of natural causes at the age of 52. There was a grainy black and white photo of the house. My house. Same porch, same windows. The only difference was that in the photo the front door was open and someone, maybe a police officer, stood in the doorway. Something about the way the shadow fell across the porch in the picture gave me chills. I copied down everything and left quickly, feeling like the walls of that dusty office were closing in too. That night I returned to the house determined to act calm. I left all the lights on. I set my phone to record audio and placed it on the kitchen counter. I wanted proof, something outside my own memory. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I started to think maybe nothing would happen now that I was prepared. At 2:37 a.m., I woke up on the couch to the sound of my phone vibrating. It had stopped recording. The battery was dead, even though it had been at 90% when I set it down. I picked it up and turned toward the hallway. That was when I saw him. It was only for a second, maybe less. A man standing at the far end of the hallway facing me. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like an old flannel shirt. His face was pale and blurred like a photograph left out in the rain. I blinked and he was gone. The hallway was empty again, but the air was colder than ever and the creaking sound under the floorboards moved slowly toward me, step by step. I couldn't move. My body refused. I just stood there clutching my dead phone, my breath shallow, my eyes fixed on the dark. Finally, the steps stopped. The coldness lifted a little. I forced myself to speak. "Who are you?" My voice cracked. No answer. Just silence. The next morning, the house looked exactly the same, as if nothing had happened. My phone was back at 60% battery. The recording file was corrupted, nothing but static. I felt like I was losing my mind. But I knew what I had seen. I knew I wasn't alone. That was the moment I realized I couldn't just keep reacting. I had to confront whatever this was. Whether it was a ghost or something else, I had to face it. Otherwise, it would keep pushing, keep trying to scare me until I did what it wanted. And I had a strong feeling that what it wanted was more than just for me to leave. I didn't know how to confront something like this. All I had was the internet. I spent hours that day at a coffee shop reading about ghosts, residual energy, house cleansings, all of it. Most of it felt like nonsense. But one article caught my eye. It said sometimes spirits linger because they are stuck, confused, or angry. Sometimes they want help. Sometimes they want revenge. The line that stuck with me was, "If you live in their place, they may see you as an intruder, not the other way around." That night, I went back to the house with a plan. I didn't bring any sage or candles, I just brought my voice. I sat in the living room, lights dim, heart pounding. "Harold Evans," I said out loud. "This is your house. I'm living here now. I'm not trying to hurt you, but I can't live like this. Tell me what you want." My voice echoed off the walls. Silence. Then, faintly from the hallway, a whisper, "Help me." I froze. My skin prickled all over. "Help you how?" I whispered back. No response. Just that cold air moving down the hallway like a tide. The moment I heard the whisper, "Help me," I felt every hair on my body stand on end. My instinct was to run, but instead I sat frozen, staring at the empty hallway. I don't know how long I stayed there, my mouth open but no sound coming out. Eventually, I forced myself to breathe again. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I whispered back again, "How can I help you?" My voice cracked. I felt ridiculous, like I was talking to myself. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The cold air that had been moving through the hallway stopped. Nothing else happened. Minutes passed. My eyes burned from staring so hard at the shadows. Finally, I stood up and turned on every light in the house one by one until the place was blazing bright. But that did nothing to calm the tremor running through my hands. I hardly slept at all that night. When morning came, sunlight poured through the windows and everything looked normal again. But I couldn't shake the memory of that whisper. If it was real, and I was now convinced it wasn't just some vague haunting. This thing had a need. It had asked for help. I didn't know what that meant, but it felt like a turning point. It was no longer just trying to scare me, it was reaching out. That day at work, I was useless. I rang up customers without hearing what they said. My manager asked if I needed to go home, and I almost laughed. Home was the last place I wanted to be, and yet it was the only place I could think about. I left early and drove to the library. The internet hadn't been enough. I wanted something older, less touched by the flood of random advice and fake stories online. I asked the librarian for local history archives and spent hours combing through old newspapers and clippings. Most of it was about town fairs, road repairs, and high school sports scores. But then I found another article about Harold Evans, the man who had died in my house. This one was from a few months before his death. It said he had been questioned by police about a missing girl from the neighborhood. Her name was Annie Rayburn, 13 years old, last seen riding her bike down the street one summer evening. The article said Harold was never charged and there was no evidence linking him to her disappearance, but neighbors had grown suspicious of him because he rarely left his house. The case had never been solved. My stomach dropped as I read the article. I copied it down word for word. When I left the library, the sun was already low, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I sat in my car, staring at the paper, thinking about the word help. Did Harold want help proving his innocence? Or was it something darker? Was he guilty and trapped somehow by what he had done? The thought of living in a house tied to a missing child made my skin crawl. That evening, I forced myself to go back to the house. I locked the door behind me and sat down on the living room floor with the article in my lap. I read it out loud, my voice trembling. "Harold Evans," I said into the empty room. "Is this what you're trying to tell me? Annie Rayburn? Did something happen to her here?" The air in the room felt heavier, like the oxygen had been sucked out. My ears rang. Then from the hallway came a soft thud like something falling. I jumped up and ran to look. On the floor in the hallway lay a small wooden box I had never seen before. It was old and worn, the wood dark with age. My hands shook as I picked it up. The lid was stuck at first, but opened with a soft creak. Inside were a few yellowed papers and a photograph. The photo showed a man and a girl standing next to a bicycle. The man was Harold Evans. The girl I didn't know, but she looked like she could be Annie Rayburn. My chest tightened. On the back of the photo was a single word written in faded pencil: sorry. I sat on the floor clutching the box, my mind spinning. This couldn't be real. Where had the box come from? It hadn't been there before. I lived alone. No one else had a key. But there it was in my hands, heavy and undeniable. I whispered into the empty hallway. Is this what you wanted me to find? Silence, but the air felt cold and charged like static before a storm. That night I dreamed of a girl's voice calling my name over and over, soft and pleading. When I woke up, my pillow was damp with sweat and tears. The box sat on my nightstand where I had left it, the photo still inside. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, but it didn't feel like daylight inside the house anymore. Over the next few days, strange things started happening more often. I would find the box moved to different rooms even though I hadn't touched it. Lights flickered when I passed by. Once I heard what sounded like a bike bell ringing faintly in the hallway, though there was nothing there. Each time it happened, the coldness returned like a tide rolling in. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I called my friend Chris, the only person I trusted enough to tell. He's the kind of guy who's always up for weird stuff, a believer in UFOs and ghosts, but also grounded enough to tell me if I was losing it. I told him everything. He didn't laugh. He didn't even hesitate. He said he'd come over that night. When Chris arrived, the house was quiet. He's taller than me and fills up a room with his presence, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a little less afraid. We sat at the kitchen table while I showed him the article and the photo. He whistled softly. "This is wild, man," he said. "If it's real, it's like he's trying to tell you something." I nodded. "That's what I think too, but I don't know what." We set up 2 cameras in the living room, one pointing at the hallway, one at the kitchen. Chris had a digital recorder and left it on the table. We turned off the lights and waited. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Chris cracked a few jokes to keep things light, but his voice was softer than usual. Around 2 in the morning, I was drifting off when I heard it. The bike bell sound again, faint and distant. Chris sat up straight. "You heard that too, right?" I nodded. The coldness came next, sweeping through the room like a gust of icy wind. The hallway creaked, and then, from the far end, the blurred figure of Harold appeared again. This time, Chris saw it too. "Oh my God," he whispered. The figure lifted a hand slowly, pointing toward the floor where the wooden box had been sitting earlier. Then it vanished. Just gone. Chris looked at me, pale as a sheet. "We got to get out of here." But something in me had shifted. I wasn't running this time. "No," I said, "he's showing us something." I picked up the box and held it out. "What do you want me to do with this?" I asked aloud. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the floorboard under my feet creaked sharply like a single step. Another board creaked, this time closer to the front door. The pointing hand had been toward the door too. It felt like a direction. Chris and I followed the creaks to the front porch. The night was silent, the sky overcast. "There's nothing here," Chris said nervously, but I crouched down near the steps. The boards were old, some cracked. One of them looked newer, like it had been replaced recently. My pulse quickened. "Help me move this," I told Chris. We pried up the board with a crowbar from my garage, Underneath was a small, hollow space filled with dirt and cobwebs. And something else. I reached in and pulled out a small rusted tin. Inside were several objects. A broken bike bell, a necklace with a heart-shaped locket, and another photograph. This one showed Annie Rayburn alone, smiling at the camera. My stomach flipped. The locket was engraved with the initials A.R. Chris took a step back. "Jesus," he muttered. I held the tin close, my hands trembling. The coldness around us deepened for a moment, then slowly lifted like a breath being released. The porch light above flickered once and went steady again. We went back inside without saying much. We put the tin next to the wooden box on the table. The house felt different now, quieter, heavier, but not as menacing. I didn't know what we had just uncovered, but I had the sense we were only part way through whatever this was. Harold had shown me where to look, but why? Was it guilt? Was it proof? Was it a plea? Chris left at dawn, shaken but fascinated. I stayed behind, staring at the objects laid out in front of me. The photograph, the bike bell, the locket, the words "sorry." The whisper helped me. I felt like I was on the edge of something huge and dark, like a cliff I couldn't see the bottom of. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I have the feeling Harold isn't finished with me yet. The house was completely silent after Chris left. I remember sitting at the kitchen table as the morning light streamed through the window, turning the dust motes into tiny golden flecks that floated in the air. Everything on the table looked like evidence from a crime scene. The wooden box, the photograph with the word "sorry," the tin we'd pulled from under the porch with the bike bell and the locket inside. It all sat there in a little pile, accusing and sad at the same time. I couldn't eat. I couldn't even drink coffee. I just sat there staring at it. All day I walked around the house in a kind of daze. I kept expecting the cold rush of air or the creaking footsteps, but nothing happened. It was as if the house had gone dormant, like whatever lived there had exhausted itself. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing in the eye of a storm, waiting for the next wave to hit. Every time I passed the table, I caught myself glancing at the objects and feeling a mix of pity and dread. By late afternoon, I knew I couldn't just keep sitting there. Harold, if it really was Harold, had shown me where to look for the tin. The locket with Annie Rayburn's initials was real. The bike bell was real. Those weren't hallucinations. They were proof that something had happened in this house, and somehow Harold wanted me to know about it. But what was I supposed to do now? Give them to the police? What would I even say? "Hi, I found this under my porch because a ghost pointed at it." They'd think I'd lost my mind. I decided to start small. I put everything into a shoebox and drove to the library again. I spent hours combing through more articles about Annie's disappearance. There was no mention of a locket or a bike bell in the original investigation. There were interviews with her parents, descriptions of search parties, but nothing concrete. It was like she had vanished off the face of the earth. Harold Evans had been questioned but cleared. He died months later. End of story. Except it wasn't the end of the story, because now I was part of it. When I got home that evening, the air inside the house felt heavy again. Not as icy as before, but dense. Like being underwater. I set the shoebox on the table and spoke out loud. "Harold," I said, "I found what you wanted me to find. What do you want me to do with it?" My voice echoed back at me, thin and small. Nothing happened. I stood there for a long time, feeling foolish. That night I dreamed again. This time it wasn't just a girl's voice. It was a whole scene, like a movie playing behind my eyelids. I saw the hallway of my house, but it looked newer, freshly painted, no cracks in the plaster. I saw Harold standing there, his hands shaking. A girl's bicycle lay on its side near the door. The girl, Annie was crying. Harold knelt down, reaching toward her, his face twisted in panic and grief. Then everything went black. I woke up gasping for breath, my heart hammering. I sat up in bed, the sheets damp with sweat, and realized the wooden box was sitting on the floor next to my bed, even though I'd left it on the kitchen table. The photograph of Harold and Annie lay on top of it, face up. I picked it up with shaking hands. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. From the hallway came a faint sound like someone tapping on the wall 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. The next morning I called Chris again. I told him about the dream, the box moving on its own, the tapping. He was quiet for a long time, then said, "I think he's showing you what happened. Maybe he's trying to clear his name or confess." That word made my stomach twist. Confess. "I don't know what to do with it," I said. "Do I go to the police?" Chris sighed. "If you do, you need something solid, otherwise they'll just nod and file it away. You have to figure out the full story first." The full story, as if that was even possible. But a strange determination started to grow in me. If Harold wanted me to help him, maybe helping meant finding the truth about Annie Rayburn. Maybe it meant finally putting the pieces together. Maybe it meant giving the girl's family closure after all these years. That idea scared me, but also gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since this started. I spent the next few days digging deeper. I found Annie's younger brother on Facebook. He still lived in the state. He was in his 50s now. I stared at his profile picture for a long time, my thumb hovering over the message button. How could I even begin to explain? In the end, I didn't write to him, not yet. That evening, I went back into the crawl space under the porch where we had found the tin. I brought a flashlight and gloves. The space was cramped and smelled of earth and mildew. I dug around for nearly an hour but didn't find anything else. When I finally crawled back out, my clothes were covered in dust. The sun had set and the house loomed dark behind me. Inside, the shoebox sat on the kitchen table where I'd left it. The objects inside seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. I sat down and opened the locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of Annie, and behind it a folded piece of paper so small I almost missed it. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out. It was yellowed and fragile. Written in faded pencil were the words, "I didn't mean to. Help her." I stared at the note until my vision blurred. I didn't mean to help her. What did that mean? Had Harold hurt Annie accidentally? Had she died here? Or was she hidden somewhere? The thought made me feel sick. But at least now I had something concrete. A note in Harold's own handwriting. It wasn't proof of a crime, but it was something. It was also a plea. That night, the house came alive again. As I sat at the table with the note in my hand, the lights flickered. The air grew icy. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps, slow, dragging like someone carrying a heavy burden. I stood up. "Harold," I said loudly, "I found your note. Tell me what you want me to do." The footsteps stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then, faint but clear, a girl's voice whispered from the hallway, "Find me." My knees went weak. "Find you where?" I whispered back. The voice didn't answer, just a soft echo. "Find me." I didn't sleep at all after that. I sat on the couch until dawn, staring at the hallway, the note clutched in my hand. My mind raced. If Annie's body had never been found, if she'd been hidden somewhere, could she still be here, on this property? Buried under the floor, behind the walls. The idea was horrifying, but it made a sick kind of sense. The next day, I rented a metal detector from a local tool shop. The clerk asked if I was going treasure hunting. I just smiled weakly. I spent hours scanning the backyard and the area around the porch. Nothing. By evening I was exhausted, my hands blistered, my head throbbing, but I couldn't stop. I felt like I was following a thread, and if I let go, I'd lose it forever. At dusk, as I was about to give up, the detector beeped faintly near the edge of the yard where an old oak tree stood. I dug there carefully, my hands shaking. After a few inches, I hit something hard. I brushed away the dirt and found an old rusted tin box, bigger than the first one. My stomach turned. I lifted it out of the ground and pried it open. Inside was a small pile of bones. They were tiny, fragile. Animal bones, I told myself at first, maybe a dog or a cat. But at the bottom lay a fragment of cloth, faded pink with a little white flower pattern. It looked like part of a dress. My vision went black at the edges. I dropped the box and stumbled backward, my heart slamming in my chest. The coldness rushed around me like a wind, and then clear as day, the girl's voice whispered right next to my ear, "Thank you." I fell to my knees in the dirt. I didn't know what I'd found, not for sure, but I knew it was something important. The air around me felt lighter, almost warm. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel watched. I felt peace. Sadness too, deep and heavy, but peace. I left the box where it was and went inside, shaking. I sat at the kitchen table with my head in my hands until the sun came up. When I finally looked up, the wooden box, the tin, the locket, they were gone. The table was empty except for the folded note. I did not move for a long time after I realized the table was empty except for the folded note. The absence of the boxes and the tin felt louder than any sound the house had made. I tried to convince myself that I had misplaced them or that Chris had taken them without telling me, but I knew that was not true. They were gone in the same quiet way they had arrived, as if whatever bound them here had been cut. Only the note remained, thin as a leaf and shaking a little in the breeze from the air vent. I picked it up and read the words again. I did not mean to. Help her. The pencil lines were so faint I could see the fibers of the paper around them. I placed it back down, careful like it might crumble under my fingers. The house was very still, the kind of still that makes you notice your own breathing. I walked the hallway looking for cold pockets or a sense of being watched. Nothing. For the first time since the first whisper, I felt like I could hear the shape of the rooms. They were just rooms. The floor creaked under my steps like before, but the creak sounded honest again. Wood on wood. When I reached the spot where I had seen the blurred figure, I stopped and stood there with my hands in my pockets. I did not speak. I just stood there. I cannot say I felt grateful yet because my hands were still shaking and my stomach kept flipping like a coin. But I did feel the edge of something softer than fear. Maybe that is the closest word. At sunrise, I went outside to the place by the oak where I had dug up the second tin. The hole gaped like a wound. I had left the rusted box open on the grass, too afraid to look again. I forced myself to kneel and study the bones with the cool light of morning. Bird. That was my first thought now that the panic had drained away. Or maybe a small mammal. They were very light, and the shape did not look right for human. The cloth was what held me. Pink with tiny flowers, the kind of pattern you put on a child. I did not want to touch it, but I knew I had to do something. Leaving it there felt wrong. Taking it inside felt wrong too. Every choice felt like the wrong one. In the end, I did the one thing I had been avoiding since the beginning. I called the police. I told the dispatcher I had found a box buried in my yard with bones and a scrap of cloth. I did not tell her about the whispers or the cold or the man in the flannel shirt. I did not tell her about the note. I just gave my address and then sat on the porch steps with my hands folded like a child in a school photo and waited. 2 patrol cars came. Later, an unmarked sedan arrived with a detective and someone from the county medical examiner. They were all polite in that careful way people are when they are expecting trouble and hoping it will not come. They asked me to show them where I found the box and how I found it. I told them about the metal detector, but not why I had rented it. I told them I had been doing some yard work and the soil was loose. It was not the whole truth, but it was a truth I could say out loud without my voice shaking. They took photographs and bagged the tin. The detective, a woman with a ponytail and a soft voice, crouched beside the hole and studied the bones. She looked up at me and asked if I could think of any reason someone might have buried a pet there years ago. I told her I had only been in the house for a short time. She nodded like that was what she expected. I could see the outline of weariness in her eyes. This was not her first small mystery. Before they left, the detective asked if anything else unusual had happened recently. I thought about the locket and the first box and the photo and the words, sorry. I thought about the face at the end of the hallway. I thought about the note still sitting on my kitchen table. I told her I had found a few old things in the crawl space under the porch the other day when I was cleaning. She asked if she could look. I showed her the space, empty now except for a few nails and a spider web. She gave me a card and said the lab would let her know soon if the bones were human and that she would follow up. She did not promise anything more. When the last car pulled away, the yard looked too bright, like the sun had turned up a notch during their visit. The house felt different after they left. The quiet was the same, but underneath it there was a new ache. The ache that comes when you tell a piece of the truth and keep the rest inside. I made coffee and sat at the table again. The note was there on the wood, patient and thin. I slid it into a plastic bag I had left from packing and put the bag in a drawer. I told the empty room that I was not hiding it. I was keeping it safe. Saying it out loud helped a little. That evening I stood at the sink and watched the light fade behind the oak tree. The porch bulb clicked on and did not flicker. I half expected the cold air to pour down the hallway, the steps to announce themselves like they used to, the whisper to rise up beside my ear. Nothing came. Still, I could not shake the feeling that something was unfinished. The girl's voice had said, "Find me," and then "Thank you." Thank you for what? For calling the police about a box of bones that likely belonged to an animal. For pulling old grief to the surface and laying it on the grass to dry. I let the water run and watched it line the sink with a thin silver skin. I could not sleep. I put on shoes and a jacket and went for a walk around the block. The town was quiet. Porch lights glowed. Somewhere a television played a game show and an audience laughed. On the second loop, I turned left instead of right and found myself on a path that led behind the houses to a narrow strip of woods and a shallow creek. Kids sometimes rode bikes down here in the summer. In daylight, it felt like a shortcut. In the dark, it felt like a ribbon between two worlds. I followed the sound of water until the path dipped and the earth turned soft and muddy. The moon was thin. My phone light threw a weak circle that swallowed more shadow than it made. I was about to turn back when my light caught a shape under the water. At first it looked like a branch with a strange angle. But then I saw the small metal dome of a bicycle bell, the kind you push with your thumb. Not shiny, but not eaten by rust either. It sat wedged between stones a few feet from the bank. I stepped down. The mud drank my shoe with a soft sigh. I reached in up to my wrist. The water was shock cold. My fingers closed around the bell and the piece of handlebar it was still attached to. It came free with a sucking sound. I held it up and water slid away. The sight of it filled my mouth with that metallic taste you get when you are about to cry and do not want to. I did not say thank you and I did not say her name. I just stood there feeling the cold water on my skin and the slow rise of another kind of cold that starts in the chest and moves out like light through fog. The creek gurgled, small and steady. Somewhere behind me, a dog barked twice and went quiet. I wrapped the bell in my jacket and carried it home. At the kitchen table, I wiped it with a towel. The metal had a faint pattern that looked like tiny stars. It felt like it belonged with the other things that had vanished. It felt like I had found a missing sentence. I put the bell beside the drawer where the note lay and stared at them both. Then I did what I should have done from the start. I called the detective and told her I had found something by the creek. I told her where. I told her it might be connected to the old case in a way I did not know how to explain. They came in the morning with waiters and a small team. The sky was a dull lid. I stood on the bank while they walked the water in a slow grid. It did not take long. 10 yards downstream, trapped in the roots of a fallen tree, they found a bicycle frame with faded blue paint and a white basket bent out of shape. The detective looked at me as they lifted it out, and for a second the weariness in her face was replaced by something like tenderness. They took photographs and taped off the area. The creek gave up more as the silt was moved. A shoe, a bundle of fabric. Later in the day, something that stopped all conversation. They were gentle with it. They spoke low. The work slowed into that careful rhythm people use when they are handling both objects and grief. I did not ask questions. I did not need the answers yet. The detective told me she would be in touch. She asked if I was all right. I nodded. I was not all right, but the word felt less impossible to say. The house waited for me. I stepped inside and listened. Still nothing. No whisper at my ear. No weight on the boards. I sat on the floor of the hallway with my back against the wall and let myself cry in the plain way that requires no explanation. When I was done, the quiet around me felt different again. It was not empty. It was full, not with fear, with the ordinary presence of a place being a place. I think that is what I had been missing even before all this began. The knowledge that rooms hold a gentle weight of their own. A few days passed. The detective called and asked me to come down to the station. In a small room with a window that was really a mirror, she told me what they had found. The bones by the oak were animal. The scrap of cloth had likely been carried there by a digging dog years ago or clawed loose from something else trapped in the soil. The creek had held the bicycle for a long time. The items caught in the roots belonged to a girl of about 13 from the late 70s. DNA testing would take time, but there was very little doubt. The family had been notified. She did not say the name. She did not have to. I asked if I was in trouble for not calling sooner. She shook her head. People stumble on truths in the oddest ways, she said. What matters is that you called. She asked me again if anything else unusual had happened in the house that might be relevant. I looked at my hands and thought about the note in my drawer and the way the porch light had finally stopped flickering and the way the air had warmed like a sigh when I found the tin. I told her I heard creaks in old wood and that sometimes the faucet ran even when I had not turned it on. She smiled in a way that said she had heard stranger confessions and wrote nothing down. When I left, the afternoon light made a white rectangle on the station floor that I stepped over like a threshold. That night, as the sun dropped, a soft breeze moved through the hallway. It smelled faintly like wet leaves and iron. I stood there, my hand on the wall where I had once pressed my ear to listen for words in plaster. I said one word into the quiet, you. I did not say Harold or Annie. I did not have to say names anymore. The house answered with a stillness so complete it felt like the end of a song holding its last note. Then, as plain as the sound of my own breath, I heard 5 slow steps, not toward me and not away, across, like someone walking from one room to the next. The boards settled, the air warmed. It was the most ordinary sound in the world. I let it be. Weeks went by. The town had its brief season of soft news. People spoke in the grocery aisle with a lowered voice and a glance to make sure children could not hear. The paper ran a small story on page 3 about a development in a long cold case and the patience of water and trees. No one mentioned my name. I was glad for that. This was not my story, not really. I was a voice that happened to be in the right room at the wrong time and then the right time again. Chris came by with coffee and sat on the porch. He wanted me to tell the whole thing from the beginning, so I did. But this time I told it without trying to convince him or myself. He listened and did not crack a single joke, which told me he understood the part of the story that did not belong to either of us. When I finished, we sat in silence and watched 2 kids ride by on bikes, their bells bright and silly in the Sunday air. After he left, I went to the hallway and stood in the creaking place and said thank you. I did not know who I was saying it to. It did not matter. I keep the note in a simple frame now. Nothing fancy. I put it on the dresser in my bedroom, not as a trophy or a relic, but as a reminder of the line between what we think we know and what calls us to look again. Some nights I dream of water lifting silt away from a bright thing. Some mornings I wake to a house that feels like it has forgiven itself for the times it could not hold what it needed to hold. I still work at the hardware store. I still sweep sawdust and count screws and make small talk about weather and oil for hinges. When the aisles are quiet, I catch myself thinking about how many things in this world were made to open and close. Doors, boxes, hands, mouths. Sometimes we forget that they are also made to be held and to be let go. If you ask me now whether I believe in ghosts, I would say I believe in people. I believe in how our lives leave traces in the places we touch. I believe in the way a voice can carry across years and still be heard if someone is willing to listen. I believe in ordinary houses and the work of making them safe. I believe in apologies that arrive late and still count. I believe in a man who wanted to say he did not mean to, and a girl who wanted to be found, and a creek that kept a secret until it could be returned. I believe in the quiet that followed. I believe in the life that goes on. Last night I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched a storm move in from the west. The first heavy drops made dark coins on the steps. The air smelled like dust waking up. When the rain came down hard, I heard it drum on the roof and the porch and the street and the oak leaves. For a second, I heard a bell ring once. It could have been a neighbor. It could have been memory. It could have been nothing at all. I smiled anyway and went inside. I turned off the lights one by one and stood in the hallway in the dark and listened. There was only the sound of rain easing back. There was only my own breath. There was only the quiet of a home that had finally learned how to rest.